My coworker spent 3 years harassing me for being a single mom and locked my daughter in a dark closet. I got her arrested. I'm a single mom working as an account manager at a marketing firm. I'd been there 3 years when Lindsay joined our team. She was married with no kids and made it clear from day one that she thought mothers didn't belong in the workplace. She'd roll her eyes when I'd leave at 5 to get my daughter Sophie from daycare. She'd make comments about how parenthood was a choice and shouldn't affect the team. During my first presentation after she joined, Lindsay interrupted to ask if I'd prepared it myself or if I was too busy with mommy duties. Our manager Erin just laughed uncomfortably. She started telling clients I might not be available for projects because of childcare issues, even though I'd never missed a deadline. She'd schedule important meetings at 4:45, knowing I had to leave at 5 for daycare pickup. When I'd ask to dial in, she'd say physical presence showed commitment. One time Sophie got sick at school and I had to leave early. Lindsay sent an email to the whole team about how some people use their kids as excuses to skip work. She actually created a spreadsheet tracking every time I left for anything child-related and presented it at our quarterly review. Erin said it showed initiative that Lindsay was monitoring team productivity. She started leaving parenting articles on my desk about the damage working mothers do to their children. She told the interns I only got promoted because the company needed to meet diversity quotas for single mothers. She'd loudly take personal calls about her amazing child-free vacations while staring at me. She actually asked Erin why the company wasted benefits on dependents when that money could go to bonuses for employees without kids. Then came, take your child to work day. The company encouraged everyone to participate. I brought Sophie, who was 5 and excited to see mommy's office. She had her little backpack with coloring books and sat quietly at my desk while I worked. Lindsay walked by and told Sophie that her mommy was selfish for making her sit in an office instead of playing with friends. Sophie asked what selfish meant. Lindsay said it meant caring more about money than your child. I told Lindsay to stop, but she said she was just being honest with the kid. During lunch, I took Sophie to the break room to eat. When we came back, Lindsay had moved all my files to say I was being unproductive having a child present. She complained to Erin that Sophie's presence was disruptive even though Sophie hadn't made a sound. Erin asked if maybe I could have Sophie sit somewhere else. I put Sophie in the small conference room with her coloring books and told her I'd be right outside. I could see her through the glass door. I went to the printer for 2 minutes to grab reports. When I came back, Sophie was gone. Her backpack was there, books open, but she was nowhere. I ran through the office calling her name. Reception hadn't seen her leave. The bathrooms were empty. I was starting to panic when I heard tiny knocking from the supply closet down the hall. The door was locked from the outside. I opened it and Sophie fell out crying. She was terrified. Said a lady told her there were toys in there, then shut the door. She'd been in the dark for 10 minutes screaming, but nobody heard her because that hallway was empty. I knew immediately it was Lindsay. I carried Sophie back to the main office where everyone could see her sobbing. Lindsay was at her desk typing like nothing happened. I asked her directly if she locked my daughter in the closet. She said that was a serious accusation, and she'd been at her desk the whole time. Sophie pointed at her and said that's the lady. Lindsay said kids make things up for attention, and maybe Sophie locked herself in by accident. Erin came over and Lindsay immediately started crying, saying I was creating a hostile work environment by accusing her of something so horrible. She said she was thinking about calling HR about my harassment. Erin told me to take Sophie home and we'd sort this out tomorrow. That night I went back to the office with building security. I asked them to check the keycard logs for the supply closet. The system showed Lindsay's card accessing it twice, right when Sophie disappeared and right before I found her. Security pulled the hallway footage. The video showed everything. Lindsay walking up to Sophie in the conference room, bending down to talk to her, then leading my daughter by the hand down the hallway. She swiped her keycard at the supply closet, opened the door, pointed inside like she was showing Sophie something interesting, and the second my baby stepped in, Lindsay pulled the door shut and walked away. The timestamp matched exactly when I'd been at the printer. The security guard made 2 copies of the footage right there, one for me and one for the police. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. The operator asked what my emergency was, and I told her someone had locked my 5-year-old daughter in a dark closet at my office building. She asked if my daughter was safe now, and I said yes, she was with me. But I had video proof of who did it, and I wanted to press charges. The operator said she was sending officers to my location and to stay where I was. The 2 police officers showed up in less than half an hour. They were both older guys, one tall with gray hair and one shorter with a thick mustache. The security guard showed them the footage on his computer screen, and I watched their faces change as they saw Lindsay lock Sophie in that closet. The tall officer asked if he could get a copy of that video, and the security guard handed him the disc he'd already burned. Then they asked me to tell them what happened from the beginning. I explained about take your child to work day, about leaving Sophie in the conference room for just 2 minutes, about finding her gone and hearing her screaming from inside the locked closet. The shorter officer wrote everything down in a little notebook. Then I told them this wasn't just a random thing, that Lindsay had been harassing me for 3 years about being a single mom. I pulled out my phone and showed them some of the emails Lindsay had sent about me being unreliable because of my kid. The tall officer looked at the shorter one and said this was criminal confinement and child endangerment, possibly assault on a minor. He asked if I wanted to press charges, and I said absolutely yes. They asked me to wait in the lobby with Sophie while they went upstairs to talk to Lindsay. I carried Sophie down to the first floor and sat in one of the big leather chairs near the elevators. She was asleep against my shoulder, her face still blotchy from crying earlier. I could feel her little heartbeat against my chest, and I wanted to cry thinking about how scared she must have been in that dark closet. About 15 minutes later, I heard voices coming from the elevator area. Loud voices. Then the elevator doors opened and the 2 officers came out with Lindsay between them. She was in handcuffs. Her face was bright red and covered in tears, and she was yelling that this was all a big misunderstanding, that she would never hurt a child, that I was lying about everything. The shorter officer told her to calm down, and she just screamed louder. Other people in the lobby stopped and stared as they walked her past me toward the front doors. Lindsay looked right at me and yelled that I was going to regret this, that she had done nothing wrong. The tall officer put his hand on her head and guided her into the back of the police car parked outside. I was still sitting there trying to process what just happened when Aaron came running out of the elevator. His tie was loose and his face looked panicked. He rushed over to me asking what was going on. Why were the police here? What happened to Lindsay? I could tell he had no idea this would actually involve cops. I pulled up the security footage on my phone that the security guard had sent me and held it out to him. He watched the whole thing, his face getting paler and paler as he saw Lindsay walk Sophie to that closet and lock her inside. When it ended, he just stood there with his mouth open. He tried to say something about how maybe there was an explanation, maybe Lindsay didn't mean for the door to lock. I stood up, careful not to wake Sophie, and told him there was no explanation that made locking a 5-year-old in a dark closet okay. I told him I was pressing charges and that he should probably call the company's lawyer, because this was going to be a big problem for everyone who ignored my complaints about Lindsay for 3 years. Then I walked out to my car and went home. The next morning, my phone rang at 8. It was a detective who said he'd been assigned to my case. He asked if I could come to the police station that afternoon to give a formal statement. I said yes and asked what I should bring. He told me to bring any evidence I had of prior harassment or problems with Lindsay. I spent the next 2 hours gathering everything. I printed out the spreadsheet Lindsay had made tracking every time I left early or came in late because of Sophie. I printed all the emails where she told clients I might not be available for projects. I took screenshots of the messages she'd sent to the interns about me only getting promoted because of diversity quotas. I put it all in a folder and drove to the station. The detective was a middle-aged guy with kind eyes who introduced himself and led me to a small interview room. He had me sit down and tell him everything from the beginning. I went through the whole 3 years. Every comment Lindsay made, every meeting she scheduled at 4:45, every article she left on my desk about bad mothers. He listened and took notes and didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked if there were other people who witnessed Lindsay's behavior toward me. I gave him the names of the receptionist who sat near our desks and heard Lindsay's daily comments. I gave him the names of the 2 interns Lindsay had talked to about me. He wrote all of it down and said this was really helpful because it showed a pattern of behavior that led up to what happened to Sophie. He said it proved Lindsay didn't just make a mistake. She had been targeting me and my daughter for a long time. That word, targeting, made my stomach hurt. When I got home that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was someone from HR asking if I could come in for a meeting the next day. I said I wanted to bring a lawyer, and there was a long pause on the other end. The HR woman said that was fine and asked who my lawyer was. I didn't have a lawyer. I called my friend Lisa, who I'd known since college. She was a lawyer, but she did contract law, not criminal stuff. I told her what happened, and she said she would come to the meeting with me anyway. She said what happened to Sophie was horrible, and she wasn't going to let the company try to cover it up or push me out. The HR meeting was in a conference room on the 3rd floor. The HR representative was a woman in her 50s who looked really uncomfortable. She had the police report in front of her and a laptop showing the security footage. Lisa sat next to me and introduced herself as my legal representation. The HR woman asked me to walk through what happened on Take Your Child to Work Day. I did, keeping my voice steady even though I wanted to cry thinking about Sophie trapped in that closet. When I finished, the HR woman said the company took this very seriously, and they were conducting their own investigation. Lisa leaned forward and said that was good, but they needed to understand the company was liable for allowing 3 years of documented harassment to continue. She pointed out that I had filed complaints about Lindsay multiple times and Aaron had dismissed all of them. The HR woman's face went even more uncomfortable, and she admitted they had documentation of my previous complaints in my file. She said those complaints had been reviewed by management and deemed not serious enough to warrant disciplinary action. Lisa asked her if she thought locking a child in a closet was serious enough now. The HR woman cleared her throat and said the company was taking immediate action. She told me Aaron was placed on administrative leave while they investigated his handling of my complaints. She said they wanted to offer me paid leave to take care of Sophie and handle the legal stuff with Lindsay's case. Lisa asked about therapy costs for Sophie, and the HR woman said they would cover that too. Lisa pulled out a document she'd prepared and slid it across the table. It was a written agreement that the company wouldn't retaliate against me in any way for pressing charges against Lindsay or for any statements I made during the investigation. The HR woman said she needed to have their legal team review it, but she thought they could agree to those terms. 3 days later, I got a call from the prosecutor's office telling me Lindsay's arraignment was scheduled for that afternoon. I asked if I needed to be there, and the prosecutor said it would be helpful but not required. I went. I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched Lindsay stand in front of the judge in an orange jumpsuit. Her lawyer was a young guy in a cheap suit who argued that Lindsay never intended to hurt Sophie, that she was just trying to play with her and didn't realize the door would lock automatically. The prosecutor stood up and pointed out that the key card logs showed Lindsay used her access card to open the door, which meant she knew it required a key card to open from the outside. She knew Sophie would be trapped in there. The judge asked Lindsay how she pleaded, and her lawyer said not guilty. The judge set bail at $50,000 and set a preliminary hearing date for 2 weeks later. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Lindsay's husband was in the front row, and I watched him pull out his phone, probably calling someone about the bail money. I left before they did because I didn't want to see her face again. The news story aired 2 days later. I was making Sophie dinner when my phone started blowing up with texts from coworkers. Someone had leaked the police report to a local news station, and they ran a piece about workplace harassment that ended with a child locked in a closet. They showed the outside of our office building and mentioned the company by name. My mom called asking if I was okay, and if she should come stay with us. I told her we were fine, but she came anyway. That night, 3 women who used to work at the company reached out to me through LinkedIn. They all had similar stories about Lindsay making comments about their kids and questioning their commitment. One woman said Lindsay told a client she was unreliable because she had twins at home. Another said Lindsay scheduled mandatory team dinners on nights she knew people had to pick up their children. They had all left the company within a year of Lindsay joining. None of them had reported it because they saw how my complaints went nowhere. I took Sophie to a child psychologist the next week. The office had toys in the waiting room, but Sophie sat pressed against my side the whole time. The doctor was a woman in her 40s who specialized in childhood trauma. She talked to Sophie alone for 30 minutes while I waited outside. When they came out, Sophie was holding a stuffed bear the doctor had given her. The doctor asked me to come back to her office while Sophie played in the waiting room where I could see her through the window. She told me Sophie had acute stress response from what happened. She was having nightmares about being trapped in dark places. She wouldn't sleep in her own room anymore and woke up screaming most nights. The doctor said Sophie needed weekly therapy sessions, and I should expect the symptoms to last for months. She gave me a list of things to watch for, like regression in toilet training or separation anxiety. Sophie had already started showing both. She wouldn't let me out of her sight and cried when I tried to go to the bathroom alone. The company's internal investigation took 2 weeks. They interviewed 15 people from our department. I got called in twice to answer questions about specific incidents. They asked about the spreadsheet Lindsay made tracking my absences and the emails she sent about my reliability. They wanted to know every time I had complained to Aaron and what his response was. Other people started coming forward with their own stories. 3 women told investigators that Lindsay had made comments to them about working mothers being less dedicated than employees without kids. They said they never reported it because they watched Aaron dismiss my complaints. One woman said she heard Lindsay tell an intern that mothers shouldn't be in leadership positions because they couldn't focus on work. The pattern was clear. Lindsay targeted working mothers, and Aaron either ignored it or encouraged it by praising her supposed dedication to the team. Aaron got fired on a Friday afternoon. The company sent an email to the whole department saying he was no longer with the firm due to failure to maintain a safe workplace environment. They said they were implementing new policies around harassment and requiring all managers to complete training on recognizing and addressing workplace bullying. The email didn't mention Lindsay by name, but everyone knew what it was about. My new temporary manager called me that evening to apologize for what I went through. She said the company should have protected me, and they failed. She told me to take as much time as I needed, and my job would be waiting when I was ready to come back. Lisa called me 3 weeks after Lindsay's arraignment. She said Lindsay's lawyer wanted to discuss a plea deal. The prosecutor was willing to let Lindsay plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for avoiding a trial. The deal included probation, mandatory anger management classes, and a permanent restraining order keeping Lindsay away from me and Sophie. Lisa said it meant Lindsay wouldn't go to jail, but she would have a criminal record and couldn't come near us ever again. I asked what would happen if we didn't take the deal. Lisa said we would go to trial and Sophie might have to testify about what happened. She said trials could take months and there was no guarantee of a conviction even with the security footage. I told her I needed time to think about it. I spent a week trying to decide. Part of me wanted Lindsay to go to jail for what she did to Sophie. I wanted her to face serious consequences and understand how badly she hurt my daughter. But another part of me couldn't imagine putting Sophie through a trial. She was already having nightmares and barely sleeping. Making her testify about being locked in that closet seemed cruel. My therapist helped me work through it. She reminded me that the restraining order meant Lindsay could never come near Sophie again. She said sometimes protecting your child meant choosing the option that caused them the least additional trauma. I called Lisa and told her I would accept the plea deal. Lisa said she would let the prosecutor know. The plea hearing happened on a Thursday morning. I sat in the courtroom with Lisa while Lindsay stood in front of the judge. She wore a gray suit and had her hair pulled back. Her lawyer stood next to her looking nervous. The judge asked if she understood she was pleading guilty to criminal confinement and child endangerment. Lindsay said yes in a quiet voice. Then she read a prepared statement her lawyer had obviously written. She said she never meant to hurt Sophie and she was sorry for what happened. She claimed she made a terrible mistake and wanted to take responsibility for her actions. The words sounded empty and rehearsed like she was reading lines in a play. The judge accepted the plea but added 200 hours of community service working with child safety organizations. He said Lindsay needed to understand the gravity of traumatizing a 5-year-old child. He told her if she violated the restraining order or failed to complete her anger management classes, she would go directly to jail. Lindsay nodded and her lawyer thanked the judge. The company settled with me 6 weeks later. Lisa negotiated the whole thing without me having to do much. They agreed to pay for all of Sophie's therapy sessions for as long as she needed them. They covered Lisa's legal fees and gave me compensation for the 3 years of hostile work environment I endured. The amount was significant enough that I could have quit and lived comfortably for a year while finding a new job. Lisa also got them to provide a strong reference letter and agree not to contest unemployment if I decided to leave. She said it was one of the best settlements she had seen for a case like this. The company clearly wanted to avoid a lawsuit and bad publicity. I decided to stay with the company. I actually liked my job and my clients. The work was interesting and challenging in ways that made me feel accomplished. The new management team seemed genuinely committed to changing the culture. They promoted me to senior account manager with a 20% raise. They moved me to a different floor with a new team that was welcoming and professional. My new manager checked in regularly to make sure I had everything I needed. She never questioned when I left at 5 to get Sophie from daycare. She told me on my first day that she had 2 kids of her own and understood that being a good parent made you a better employee. The team had 3 other working mothers who immediately invited me to lunch. They told me they were glad I stayed and that what happened to me should never happen to anyone. Sophie's therapy sessions happened every Tuesday afternoon. The doctor's office had a playroom where Sophie could work through her feelings using toys and art supplies. After 3 months, the nightmares started happening less often. Some weeks she slept through the night without waking up scared. She began talking about what happened in simple terms that showed she was processing it. She told me the mean lady made a bad choice and couldn't hurt her anymore because she wasn't allowed to come near us. Her doctor said this was good progress and showed Sophie was developing healthy coping skills. She still slept in my bed most nights, but she was starting to spend time in her own room during the day. She played with her toys there and sometimes took naps in her bed. The doctor said we should let her move at her own pace and not rush her back to sleeping alone. 6 months passed and I landed 2 major clients for the company. The first was a tech startup that needed a complete rebrand. I pitched them a strategy that focused on their product benefits instead of just features. They signed a 6-month contract worth more than any account our team had brought in that quarter. The second client was a healthcare company expanding into new markets. I developed their campaign strategy, and they were so impressed they extended the contract for another year. My new manager called me into her office after the healthcare deal closed. She told me I was doing amazing work, and the client specifically requested to work with me on future projects. She asked if I needed anything to make my job easier. I mentioned that sometimes I had to leave right at 5 for daycare pickup and felt bad about it. She looked confused and said leaving at 5 was normal. She told me she had 2 kids and always left by 5:30 herself. She said being a good parent made you better at time management and prioritizing tasks. The other people on my new team were great. 3 of them were working mothers who invited me to lunch during my first week. They shared tips about managing work and kids. One woman brought her daughter to the office sometimes when school was closed and nobody cared. Another had photos of her kids all over her desk and talked about them proudly during meetings. Nobody ever made comments about my parenting or questioned my commitment. When I had to leave for Sophie's school events, my manager just asked me to update my calendar. The team actually celebrated when I told them about landing the tech startup account. They took me out for drinks after work and toasted to my success. Then everything changed again on a Tuesday morning. Sophie's daycare director called me at 9:30. Her voice sounded tight and worried. She said Lindsay had shown up at the daycare asking to see Sophie. The staff recognized her immediately from the photos I had given them when the restraining order was issued. They told Lindsay she needed to leave or they would call the police. Lindsay started crying and said she just wanted to apologize to Sophie for what happened. She said she had been going to therapy and realized how much she had hurt us. The director told her that didn't matter because there was a legal order keeping her away from both of us. Lindsay refused to leave the parking lot. She sat in her car watching the playground where the kids were playing outside. The director called the police and kept all the children inside until officers arrived. 2 patrol cars showed up within 10 minutes. Lindsay was still sitting in her car when they approached her. She got out and tried to explain that she just wanted to make things right. The officers checked the restraining order in their system and told her she was under arrest for violating it. She started sobbing and saying this wasn't fair. They handcuffed her and put her in the back of the patrol car. The director called me after Lindsay was taken away and assured me Sophie never saw her. She said the staff handled everything perfectly, and Sophie was safe inside playing with blocks the whole time. I got a call from the prosecutor's office that afternoon. He told me Lindsay had violated a court order and would face serious consequences. He said the judge took restraining order violations very seriously, especially when children were involved. Lindsay's hearing was scheduled for the next week. The prosecutor said he would push for jail time since she had deliberately gone to my daughter's daycare, despite knowing she was legally forbidden from coming near us. He asked if I wanted to provide a victim impact statement. I said yes. At the hearing, Lindsay stood before the judge looking terrible. Her hair was messy and she had dark circles under her eyes. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was genuinely remorseful and just wanted closure. The judge cut him off and said the restraining order existed for a reason. He said Lindsay had already traumatized a child, and now she was continuing to harass the family. He sentenced her to 60 days in jail. Lindsay started crying and her lawyer asked for probation instead. The judge said no. He said maybe 60 days would teach her that court orders were not suggestions. The bailiff led her away still crying. I felt relieved watching her go. She had finally faced real consequences for her actions. The company reached out to me a month later about developing new workplace policies. They wanted my input on preventing harassment and creating a better environment for working parents. I met with the head of HR and 2 executives. They asked me to describe everything that had happened with Lindsay and what warning signs were missed. I told them about the 3 years of comments and how my complaints were dismissed. I explained how Aaron had actually praised Lindsay for tracking my parenting-related absences. They looked uncomfortable hearing all of this laid out. The HR director said they wanted to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. They asked if I would help write new policies around harassment reporting and family-friendly scheduling. They also wanted me to train managers on recognizing subtle discrimination patterns. I agreed because I didn't want any other parent to go through what I had experienced. We spent weeks developing the new policies. They included mandatory harassment training for all employees. Managers had to document any complaints immediately, and HR would investigate within 48 hours. The company also implemented flexible scheduling options for parents and stopped scheduling important meetings after 4:30. They created a clear process for reporting discrimination with multiple channels so people didn't have to go through their direct manager. I led the first training session for managers, and it felt good helping create real change. A year after everything happened, Sophie started kindergarten. She walked into her classroom confidently on the first day and barely looked back at me. Her teacher said she was doing great and made friends easily. The nightmares had stopped months ago. She slept in her own bed now and talked about the closet incident like it was something that happened a long time ago to someone else. Her therapist said she had processed the trauma in a healthy way and didn't need regular sessions anymore. At work, I was considered for a director-level position. My manager nominated me and said my client work and policy development made me a strong candidate. The interview process would start next month. Sophie and I had a routine that worked. I picked her up from the school at 3 and we spent afternoons together doing homework and playing. Some evenings we went to the park or got ice cream. Weekends were for adventures like the zoo or children's museum. I had learned that protecting her and standing up for myself was the most important thing I could have done. Our life was genuinely better than it had been before Lindsay joined our team. Sophie was happy and confident. I had a job I loved with people who respected me. Everything had worked out better than I could have imagined back when I was enduring Lindsay's daily harassment. Standing up for myself and my daughter had changed both of our lives for the better. So yeah, that happened. I don't even know how we got here, but thanks for sticking around. This honestly feels more like a late night chat than a video.